into Sustainable Development Goal 14, that of life below water, our ocean, and one with special meaning for our blue Pacific continent, where our Pacific large ocean states are host to some of the most abundant marine species and biodiversity on the face of our blue planet. My name's Lisa Williams-Lahari. I'm supporting our fantastic panel of leaders joining us today from across the Pacific for our Blue Pacific Talanoa webinars for the people. Before we introduce our key speakers, we are joined by another very special guest, the Pacific Oceans Commissioner and our Secretary General, Henry Puna. He's providing us with some welcome remarks for this Blue Pacific Talanoa session on the future of this mighty United Nations SDG 14 for life below water. It's a topic especially close to his heart. During his term as Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, the vision of the world's largest multi-use marine park, the Marae Moana, came into law and took on life. SG, Oceans Commissioner, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa. Kia ora to you all joining us today from across our Blue Pacific continent. I trust that everyone joining us today did or participated in something special to commemorate World Ocean Day this year. As we celebrate Ocean Week this week, I am reminded of my visit to Puna, Tahiti, this past month. There, I met a group of young school children who were kind enough to share with me the progress they had achieved with reversing coastal degradation after 6 years of managing their own marine area right outside their school. It reaffirmed for me the success we can all achieve if we bring together science and our own traditional knowledge. I was very impressed by the children's knowledge, innovation, and wit. And indeed, they did not hesitate to make it clear that it was my generation that had contributed to the current state of oceans across their ocean and across our planet. In thinking through what my vision is for our Blue Pacific Ocean in 2050, my mind goes to the example set by these wonderful children. I want our future generations to be able to go spearfishing and to be able to eat that fish without fear. I want them to be able to have choices in how and where they live or work. I want them to have opportunities. I want them to know what their island home is like, not by looking at old photographs or from a boat at a distance or even on the surface looking down into the deep. I want them to take on the baton and be the custodians of the ocean with all the adequate means to do so. Their parents want the same thing, I am sure. But what are their aspirations? Lavetanalagi Seru of Alliance for Future Generations will share with us some elements today to guide us in how we should build that future. And earlier this week, I convened the Pacific Ocean Alliance. They shared their concerns and their challenges and discussed the opportunities that lie ahead. As a collective, we have a sum of different visions, interests, and priorities. But differences represent diversity of views, and these can be worked through with dialogue and genuine engagement towards an agreed and refined outcome. For instance, the SDGs were developed and adopted 7 years ago to address differing views and interests in ocean governance and management. We still have a long way to go to realize our goal, but I hope we can do it in the next 8 years before the SDGs expire. Friends, we have a lot of opportunities this very year to turn the tides. The finalization of the BBNJ Treaty, on which Ms. Kautoke of Tonga will provide an update and some insights. Also, I am delighted today to hear from Honorable Mona Ailu'u of Niue, as well as Honorable Stephen Victor of Palau. They will share with us their respective countries' vision of ocean conservation and management, the challenges and opportunities they face, and what role they see the region playing to support them. At the regional level, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders have tasked us with developing a 2050 strategy for our Blue Pacific continent. This strategy puts valuing, protecting, and managing the ocean at its very heart. It will reframe what it is that we collectively want as a region, and more importantly, how to bridge our differences. One way to do that is through such discussions as we are having today. That said, I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panelists today. All the very best, and vinaka wakalevu.
Thank you very much, SG Puna. I'm aware that we are having a few issues with joining up of Minister from Palau, Honorable Stephen Victor. So without further ado, we will be leading with another Honorable Minister, this time from the Rock of Polynesia. Joining us from Niue, or New Zealand more correctly, on her way back to Niue, is the Honorable Esa Mona Ainu'u, Minister for Natural Resources. And as a former broadcaster turned political leader, she's no stranger to the world of public advocacy for what the people of her country need. As the Minister for Niue's Natural Resources, she has played a key role in ensuring the passage through Cabinet of the Niue Moana Mahu Marine Protected Area Regulations. These ensure the legal protection of 40% of Niue's exclusive economic zone of 127,000 square kilometers. She's going to tell you about the movement towards 100% of that exclusive economic zone. And without further ado, here to tell us more about the vision and impact of this world-leading action that has been announced on the cusp of World Oceans Day just recently, we welcome Minister Ainu'u joining us. Whakalofalahiatu, Minister. Over to you.
Kauilahi, Lisa, kalafalahiatu kia koe. Kaue ki atua, kua mai ki ke kaupalataha tau turu ki he mga hane, pia foki ki he tau matakainang ne kua amamune ki ke whakatutala. Greetings. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to join the discussions today. I apologize if I cut out. I'm having a bit of a problem as my counterpart, Minister Victor. But I guess this is how it is when you're everywhere, not at home. So kalafalahiatu to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to speak on what Niue is doing with our ocean space. It's a privilege and an honor to always speak for Niue. I haven't prepared any notes, but I'm going to be talking about what you have expressed already in regards to our Moana Mahu, or our Marine Protected Area, and our EEZ. But I'd like also to acknowledge SG Puna for those very strong, for their strong statement that has just been expressed. Kauelahi. I also share the same sentiments as you, and I support the work that has been undertaken over the years to get us this far. In regards to where we are in Niue, we have just come also, as you said, to Fiji to talk about ocean as well. Ocean is a very much part of my life, and everyone in Niue grew up in Niue, born and grown in Niue. So I'm very privileged to be speaking on behalf of Niue about our ocean space. This is something that the government has always wanted to establish, is to look at where we are with the ocean space, seeing the value that we have and what we can contribute to the future of our planet. And these are some of the initiatives that in partnership, also with a public-private partnership with the Tofia Niue. These initiatives have come up, but we, of course, committed 40% of our exclusive economic zone as a marine protected area, and that also includes Beveridge Reef, which is our only other small atoll. And work has been very robust in trying to establish the laws, which is important for us to make sure that the laws are in place first to govern our work within this space. So I'm very thankful also to my previous or former Premier of Niue, Kautoke Talanoa, for his vision also to make sure that we get there over the line, to ensure that we commit that 40%. It is a huge challenge for us, as we all know, in the Pacific, especially for a small island state, Niue. We don't have the monitoring and surveillance mechanisms to help us. So we rely heavily on the crop agencies and our neighbors, especially Tonga, Cook Islands, to help us with the monitoring. There has been a few challenges with the latest one. I'm sure you've all heard on in the media with Beveridge Reef, but that's an ongoing investigation, so we won't go to details in regards to that incident. However, we are very hopeful that it will resolve very soon, and we like to also thank the government of Tonga and New Zealand, Australia for helping us. In regards to where we are and the announcement back in March, April, on the public-private partnership with Tofia Niue, this is expanding on the commitment of the 40%. So we're looking at what we can benefit from, or what we can build on what has already been established, changing the laws, recognizing what we have as a resource. So I'm very thankful that we have experts on the island, Brendan Pasisi and Coral Pasisi, Dr. Josie Tamati, and stakeholders who have supported this initiative to progress and look at 100% multi-use marine park. Now it's called Nukutuluea. This is a baby of Moana Mahu, and we're working to find ways on how we can protect or identify areas that we can use this park as a part activities that can take place with fishing. Unlike the 40% of Moana Mahu, that is a no-take zone. But Nukutuluea, we have different areas that you're allowed to fish from. And also from that, there has been other components or elements that have come out of the marine space of Nukutuluea. And we launched this in Auckland. Unfortunately, we were on our way to Palau, to the Oceans Conference, but we decided there was not enough time, so we launched in Auckland. There's a lot to talk about, and I know I'm a politician, as Honourable Puna will probably tell you. I can't stop talking, and sometimes I tend to go out of the context of the topic, but I would try to remember what I'm talking about in this space. But I just wanted to say that Niue is really a small rock, but a huge heart. So we are trying our best with whatever we can do to contribute to the efforts to try and see where we are with conservation and other areas as well. If there are any other questions later on, I will be happy to answer those, but I better stop there in case I continue and unable to stop. Kawelahi.
Kawelahi, Minister, and of course there will be more time following these opening presentations to take another deep dive with more questions. We head across from the Rock of Polynesia to the Kingdom of Tonga, where Rose Lesley Kautoke is Senior Crown Consul, Head of Legal Advice and International Law within the Attorney General's Office. She specializes in public international law, environmental law, and the big one, the law of the sea. Ms. Kautoke has represented her country in multilateral negotiations ranging from trade, oceans, sustainable development, climate change, other priorities of not just the government of Tonga, but all our Pacific governments as well. She represented Tonga in the preparatory committees and the 4 sessions we've had of the BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference. And she's here to unpack that acronym and share insights and the urgency of this ocean's work with us here today. Maloelele, Rose, and over to you.
Maloelele, Lisa, and I'd like to thank you for the introduction. It is indeed an honor for me to be a part of this distinguished panel and to share a few updates on the BBNJ negotiations. It is quite a technical negotiation, and I will do my best in trying to provide a brief and understandable update on these negotiations. Before I start, I'd just like to highlight my background, which, if you could see, it shows different parts of the world. And the part which is actually dark blue, that's the area, ocean areas this implementing agreement intends to address. And so just to give a brief overview of what the BBNJ negotiations is, it's basically an intergovernmental conference comprised of member states of the United Nations and NGOs, IGOs, that have been mandated to develop an international legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And it intends to focus on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in the areas which I have highlighted, which is areas beyond national jurisdiction. The implementing agreement will address topics identified in a package that was agreed to by member states in 2011. And it covers in 4 components, basically the first, marine genetic resources and the questions on the sharing of benefits. The second is measures such as area-based management tools and marine protected areas, which I believe, are aware of. The third is environment impact assessment. And the fourth is capacity building and transfer of marine technology. So the Pacific Group, through our respective missions in New York, together with capital-based experts and crop agencies, have worked tirelessly and have actively engaged as a group in the preparatory phases of the BBNJ and the 4 sessions of the Intergovernmental Conference. So right now, there are preparations underway for the 5th and hopefully the final session of the BBNJ negotiations. It will take place in New York at the United Nations from the 15th to the 26th of August. And it's such an honor to work alongside these Pacific diplomats and experts in advancing our interests. And so just a brief of what priorities and interests we as the Pacific are fighting for inclusion in the implementing agreement. I'll just cover a few of them, not the entire priority, but in essence, for marine genetic resources, we would like a robust access and benefit sharing mechanism. We'd also like to recognize the special case of us, the small island developing states, in the stewardship of the ocean, but also our connection to it. The third is ensuring when we're implementing measures under this agreement, it does not impose a disproportionate burden on us as citizens. Fourth is the need to consult us as adjacent states and also Indigenous peoples and local communities. We also have highlighted the need to recognize relevant traditional knowledge, the need to protect our existing high sea pockets, and the importance of capacity building, transfer of marine technology, and appropriate institutional arrangements under the agreement. So the new implementing agreement will contribute to strengthening UNCLOS and address gaps which are not covered under the convention. And this is highlighted under one of the targets of SDG 14. And it also complements the role of us as the Pacific in our role as shared stewards of the Pacific Ocean, as highlighted in the 2050 Blue Strategy. So that in a nutshell, is basically what the BB&J negotiations are, where we're at, and what we're doing. And it's one of the many work undertaken by our Pacific diplomats and experts at the global level to ensure there are robust mechanisms in place to protect and conserve our Pacific Ocean and ensure a healthy and resilient ocean for current and future generations to come, even in 2050. So that is a brief update, Lisa. And if there are any questions, I look forward to answering them. And happy World Oceans Week to everyone. Malo Albito.
Malo Opito, and thank you very much for that presentation, Rose. I'm sure there will be many more questions to come on how we can keep those beautiful blue boundaries up there, beautiful and blue. Colleagues, we have been sent a short update from the Minister in Palau. Honorable Stephen Victor has been called away to a cabinet meeting. He is trying to come out and reconnect and then go back into the meeting, such as his desire to join us today. But so far, no luck. We will keep checking in on him throughout. And meanwhile, we will move along now and come back to Fiji, where we are joined by Lavetanalagi Seru. He's a youth activist. He brings a work background in youth development, climate change, gender, human rights, social inclusion, disaster risk reduction to the table. He's currently the Regional Policy Coordinator of the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, and he's also the co-founder of the Alliance for Future Generations. It's in Fiji, where the largest young people-led network on sustainable development is part of this wonderful new network. In 2020, Langi was appointed as the Vice Chair of the 2021 United Nations Food System Summit. Now, that was probably why you saw him in his World Oceans Day speech last year, talking about the value and the abundance of the ocean as a source of food. So he was really getting to the heart of it for many of us. He's here to speak to us as well as the Pacific's Regional Board Advisor for the Next Generation Climate Board of the Global Green Grants Fund, and he's a board member of Climate Action Network International. So with all those global hats and with all his Fiji ones, he's joining us here today. Bulavinaka Langi, tell us where the ocean will be at 2050.
Bulavinaka, and thank you, Lisa, for that introduction, and good afternoon to fellow distinguished panelists and to our audience. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the discussions today. I'd like to also acknowledge the remarks made earlier by Secretary General Puna, which we totally resonate with, and a message adds on to the message that I have to share today. I'd like to begin by highlighting that the ocean is one of the greatest unsung climate hero. It is the largest ecosystem on the planet and the most important carbon sink. With the UN climate negotiations taking place in Bonn this week, I'd like to underscore the message that has been shared by many past and current Pacific leaders and voices, and that is, we cannot talk about climate action without ocean action. To this end, we strongly and urgently welcome the UNFCCC's decision to hold an annual ocean and climate dialogue. Young people have played a vital role in organizing and advocating for issues in the Pacific, including the protection and the conservation of our oceans. A clear example was demonstrated by Pacific youth, the young Solwara, when they mobilized and wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Japan out of concern about the potential harm from the planned Fukushima nuclear discharge and the impact it will have on the health of our ocean, which is the economic, spiritual, and cultural heart of Pacific countries. When we look to the future we envision for Blue Pacific continent is one where Pacific young leaders and future generations have clear pathways on how to sustainably manage our ocean resources to improve livelihoods, create economic opportunities, and maintain our tradition and cultures. We envision a future where young people will have opportunities to collaborate and to contribute as equal partners in the efforts to conserve and protect our oceans. How does this look like? It means increased support for empowerment and capacity building and capacity strengthening opportunities, so that we are nurturing our young leaders. We are nurturing in our young leaders a deep sense of appreciation for the ocean and its life-giving ecosystems. It means ensuring ocean literacy forms a part of our educational curriculums, from preschool right through to tertiary level education. It means increased investment in ocean-related scholarships in order to build a wider body of Pacific Ocean scientists and academics who not only work from a frame of Western science, but are also integrating traditional knowledge and indigenous wisdom into their research and academic work. It means increased support for community-based ocean conservation projects and programs that are being led by young people and communities, and that funding and technical support are made accessible for these groups, unlocking potential for innovative solutions to address the ocean crisis we face in the Pacific. It means that all voices are being heard, including that of youth, of women and girls, of people with disabilities, and of indigenous communities. When we have critical discussions about our ocean, we must leave no one behind. Finally, it means that policies being formulated, decisions being made, and actions being implemented concerning our shared Pacific Ocean are being made with a deep understanding that we are merely custodians and stewards of this vast blue Pacific Ocean, and that our actions today must be oriented towards ensuring that our oceans survive and thrive into the future.
Vinaka to you, Langi, and so much food for thought there in what we have all heard, colleagues. From the beginning comments from SG around the need for a legacy moment, the strengthening and the capacity building, the partnerships with youth, the need to recognize our ocean as a living part of our identity as citizens of this blue continent, a life-giving, a nurturing ocean, an ocean that helps us achieve economic aspiration, but remain sustainable to the core for future generations. Through all this, I'm going to now open up the floor for Q&A, whether it's to talk about newest leadership in terms of the Mona Mahu and the Beverage Reef projects, whether it's to talk about what Langi has just raised or go back to the BBNJ talks. Let's open up the ocean floor and dive in. I'm seeing some specific questions come up, but before we take that specific one, let's do a general one and go round robin for each of you to answer. And I guess it's around a timely topic, the topic of regionalism, solidarity, cooperation, working and delivering as one. How have each of you, how important is that value of working together rather than alone? How much does it play into the work each of you do and what the impact that you hope to achieve? We'll start with you, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I guess when it comes to conventions and the intention behind it, the impact that I wouldn't say it's a sole effort, because it's something that that I cannot do on my own, but it's a collective effort, and it's the way we as the Pacific approach these negotiations. Is basically to ensure that our priorities are recognized. We as SIDS, we as the Pacific, traditional knowledge, and these are incorporated into these agreements. Right now, I think we're at a stage where we have a lot of distinguished experts who are capable of actually engaging and fighting and advocating for our interests in these negotiations. And I do recognize the question that is in what do I foresee is a difficulty. And the difficulty is similar to that we face in implementing ocean priorities within our jurisdiction. It's a resource capacity. And it is our hope that engaging in these negotiations, there will be recognition of the need to assist us and provide the necessary assistance to implement our obligations under BBNJ. And so I hope that basically answers the question, and also the question that was directed specifically to me. But I hope the impact is basically generations to come, current generations to come. Thank you.
Malo Rose, we'll go to Minister Ainuu and then round back to Lave or Langi for that response on how you work collaboratively and how much that impacts on what you want to achieve.
Thank you, Lisa. This is one of the topics that is very close to us as decision makers in the Pacific, to have the solidarity within the region and whatever it is that we wish to develop, or whatever it is that we are working on as individual countries to make sure we achieve our goals. And over the years, it has been it's been great to see us collaborating on many of our discussions to do with the development of the Pacific Islands. For us in Niue, it's very important for us, as mentioned by earlier by Rose in regards to the capacity. We find that a huge challenge for us, and so as we have also relied on our neighbors, our Pacific neighbors, to assist us on the way. So it's very, very important to us as a small island state. And also just recognizing our capacity to help others. As we have come, we have a very limited pool of, or our population is very limited, and a very limited pool to trade from in regards to helping others. But by saying that, we are very strong in our beliefs that we stand together as the Pacific nation, we will achieve a lot more. And what we are doing in Niue with our marine protected area, or our aspirations for conservation, we also wish to encourage other islands to do the same. Because if we see it at a mass, it's much better that we feed off each other, learn from each other, learn as we go forward. And it's something that's very, very important for us to have that the solidarity in the Pacific, and it's the Pacific way to help each other. So it is very important. Go ilahi.
Minister, and yes, fisheries cooperation is where the Pacific seems to be leading the world. Some great achievements there. Over to you, Langi.
Vinaka, Lisa, I believe for many Pacific communities, and generally in our Pacific societies, we have been communal based. And so working in solidarity and in working together as communities is not something new. It's already in our DNA. And in the context of our work with young people, not only in Fiji, but across the Pacific, we've relied on, the expertise, on each other's expertise, but also, we are engaged in information sharing virtually, allowing us to be updated about some of the conversations and critical discussions that are happening about oceans in as much as any other topic. So we certainly believe that, the solidarity of the Pacific is of the solidarity of the Pacific working together is critical, and something we must always ensure that that we are keeping, and that is critical to to all the regional discussions, the regional work, is ensuring that we are building that sense of solidarity. But also, as I stated earlier, the inclusion of voices, especially of those in the peripheries, voices that are often not heard is vital, and that's something we must also work towards, ensuring that women and young women are part of these discussions. They represent a large percentage of fisher folks in the Pacific. And we also need to bring other groups into the discussion, including people with disabilities.
Nā ka waka level there, Langi. Just before we head back into the chat, one obvious question and follow up to what you've just said. Often in our part of the world, youth look to the elders to give, to learn and provide the solutions. But one thing increasingly we are hearing from our leaders as they look to youth is, what is your X factor that makes you work so well together? What lessons do youth have to offer our leaders, especially through these times and all the competing challenges that we are seeing around us?
Thank you, Lisa, for that question. One of the principles and that really grounds our work has been, this principle around intergenerational equity, and creating intergenerational spaces where we are learning from our Pacific elders, and also our elders are learning from young people. In today's digital world, there's so much that young people have to offer in terms of solutions, creative solutions and ideas to address some of the challenges confronting Pacific Island communities. And we've been able to bring together, these two groups, the elders and young people, to work on some really exciting projects where they've harnessed the creativity and the innovation of young people, but also have been able to bring in that element of traditional knowledge and indigenous wisdom. And I think the X factor for young people is they bring in the passion, they bring in the creativity and the energy in this work.
Nakalangi. We are going to head across and take a question from Rieko Hayakawa. Konnichiwa, Rieko. But before we do that question with you on BBNJ, let's take a comment and see if you want to respond to it from Whangaloa Tufunga. It's around capacity building, that it is important to implement. We do have Pacific Island country experts, but funding is the issue. For example, he's citing that the Pacific International Maritime Law Association that was set up in Fiji in 2005 due to funding became defunct. So legislation, it's claimed, is the key to success. What's your response to that? Is it all about legislation? Are there other ways to ensure that good ideas don't fall down? We'll start with Minister Essa. Minister, if you can come back on and provide us with your response, then we'll head across to Tonga and back to Fiji. Any comments on that? We're having a stability internet issue from the minister. We'll head to Tonga. Thank you, Rose. And then to Langi, if you want to comment on the idea that was shared there.
Malawa Pito, Lisa, legislation is important, but also access to scientific knowledge is also important. It works together. We can have robust legislation in place, but sometimes we wouldn't have the capacity or the knowledge to implement it. So I think it is key, but it's not the only key. I think it works together with different factors, including implementation, resources, and capacity to actually ensure we're achieving the objectives of the legislation. So that's my comment on that. Thank you.
Malo, Rose, over to you, Langi.
In the context of our work, capacity building and capacity strengthening is critical, and funding is a challenge for many groups, especially community groups, youth groups, women's groups who are working on ocean-related projects and programs to access. And one of the things that we've been advocating for is making funding accessible for these groups, because they do such, transformative work on the ground that can be easily scaled and then replicated in many other communities, from coral restoration projects to mangrove planting, and so forth. And one of the challenge has been accessing funding to sustain their work, and funding to be able to even document their work and share these best practices with other communities who are experiencing the same challenges. So I might not have a silver bullet answer to that question. But it's something that we need to consider as a region, as to how do we make funding accessible, how do we mobilize funding so that it's geared towards some of these community groups that are doing work on the ground. And even things like marine protected areas that needs a thorough consultation. These activities do cost money, and so we need to think about a sort of a regional funding facility that can cater for the needs of our community. That's very that addresses the context and the specific challenges that some of these community groups are facing when it comes to accessing funding.
Naka, for those looks like I'm having a bit of the internet issues that Minister is having in Auckland. Minister, if you're able to join us for a comment on that. Otherwise, we're going to head back up to BBNJ territory, it looks like, Rose, and get back to, I think there was a comment, but there was also a question, and it is around the view that challenges Pacific SIDS are facing in addressing implementation of the internationally legally binding agreement once it's adopted. Seems to be there are negotiation contexts and nuances that are being put under the spotlight here. What are the main reasons why ICG for BBNJ did not reach an agreement or has yet to reach an agreement? That one's coming from Rieko Hayakawa. Thank you, Rose.
Malo Pito Lisa. And I guess as I had mentioned, the reason we did not reach conclude in IGC4 is the fact that we couldn't conclude the treaty then. And there's still a lot of areas that need to be agreed upon. And so I guess that it's almost as though the differences between certain developed countries and the developing states on how some of the elements are to be covered in the implementing agreement. It's also a bit difficult because it's an implementing agreement and it's almost having to tiptoe around already existing agreements which address at least some components of it. And so, but I think progress has been made so far, and the president has issued a revised text that has sort of set out what countries and member states and also participants have actually raised as to what should be reflected in this text. But in summary, we couldn't agree to a treaty at IGC4. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that Rieko will let us know soon enough if she's got a follow-up. We do have a comment around that as well from another person in the Q&A who says a lack of political will is also one of the huge challenges SIDS are facing to address their ongoing issues. You may wish to comment on that comment and counter comment, or over to you, Langi, and then back to you, Rose, on that statement that a lack of political will is indeed one of the huge challenges SIDS face to address their ongoing issues.
Thank you. Of course, the lack of political will is a challenge. And one of the things as young people is to hold our governments accountable, and also to put pressure on our governments and also on our decision on our leaders in terms of some of the commitments they've made, not only related to oceans, but also to other regional and international agreements, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have a critical role in that sense to hold our leaders accountable, but also to lead some of the actions on the ground and be able to demonstrate to government that there are things that young people are able to lead, but in order to scale that, we'll need increased investment, increased support, and increased engagement with young people in as much as civil society organizations. And so it's an ongoing issue, but there are ways where as a collective we are able to communicate and work with governments and other key state actors to address this issue around political will. Yeah.
Minister Ainuu, would you like to comment?
I deeply apologize for my internet, and I'm sorry I caught part of the discussions, and I didn't quite get the question.
So the question was around the huge challenges that SIDS face to address their ongoing issues. I think it was in the context of the BBNJ negotiations still waiting to reach agreement, and lack of political will being posed as one of the factors behind those huge challenges that SIDS are facing. So the question was, did you want to comment on that in terms of political will itself? And I guess as well, we should also clarify political will from where, because we're not the only part of the world that is tied up in this whole process of global negotiations for the one ocean that the entire world and almost 200 countries in it share. So over to you, Minister. It looks like Minister Ainuu has frozen on her connection. So what I might do is just parking and holding on to any comments that people want to make on that last issue raised, is really around looking forward. Because as you know, there are so many meetings and the world is just starting to move up into planes and get into face-to-face gatherings again. And now the Pacific is about to head into Lisbon for more talk and more action for advocacy around oceans, around the themes that each of you, each and together, are championing here. What is the biggest task, or what are some of the hurdles and the opportunities that lay ahead of the Pacific as we journey towards Lisbon and beyond that to another COP negotiation? Langi, would you like to start, and then we'll head across to Rose and see if we can bring Minister back in.
Sorry, Lisa, are you able to repeat the question?
So the question is around, I guess, the journey now of all the advocacy and the messaging, the priorities that you are talking about here, the journey towards the global stage that is the Lisbon Conference, the UN Oceans Conference, and then of course beyond that towards the Oceans Climate Nexus at the COP. First up, towards Lisbon, what are the opportunities and the challenges for the work that you're doing as you prepare to champion on that global stage?
Thank you, Lisa. I guess for as a civil society, for someone who's working in civil society and also working for young people, it's easy to get lost in the conversation, the global discussions around oceans. And so that remains to be a challenge for those who are working in this space, but also to be disconnected. There are very few young people who are part of these discussions. The rest of the young people and others in communities do not have a sense of what's happening at the global stage and how how this translates to work in communities, to their livelihoods, etc. So I think there are opportunities to really effectively communicate and work together as partners to communicate why these are important for the Pacific, why these priorities are important for the Pacific, and the need to come together to elevate and support those who are at the front lines, who are part of these global negotiations. When we move forward, one of the challenge that we need to be mindful of as well is when these decisions, when these agreements are being endorsed or ratified by Pacific Island governments, that we need to ensure that it's not only just a piece of document that's lying in office, but there must be a stronger coherence between what's being agreed to and the implementation on the ground. And so we don't want to see that we are part of these global negotiations, but then the work on the ground is really there's a disconnect and there's a lack of coherence between policy and practice. Yes, that's probably my response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Langi. Over to you, Rose. The road from here to Lisbon or to the next round of discussions on BBNJ, what lies next for you? What lies ahead?
Well, I guess for me, it's the way I see it. It's we as people, as Pacific people, our connection with each other, our collaboration with each other. It is only through that we are able to advance our priorities, and that's particularly true when it comes to the BBNJ negotiations on that particular issue. But I think beyond Lisbon, beyond all these negotiations, I guess our work now, the hope is that it will embody our values as it relates to the ocean. And you have them embodied in these international negotiations, international agreements. In addition to that, we see the 2050 Blue Strategy, which will set our priority and guide us as we move forward as Pacific people. So it's having these documents, having these strategies, but also instilling the value in our children and in all generations at home will help us continue to prioritize the health and the conservation of our ocean and resources now and beyond all these conferences, all these negotiations, and even 2050, beyond our lifetime. So I think, I believe I've heard all of us, even myself, the value was instilled at a young age, born and raised in Tonga. We didn't have much in Tonga, but going to the ocean to swim, to fish, to gather shells. And so it's values like that that actually help us prioritize and value our surrounding environment. And it's encouraging to see the initiatives to actually ensure that our people are ocean literate, taking that forward. So that's part of, steps beyond just enjoying the ocean for what it is, but knowing it more and appreciating and valuing it more. So I mean, that's how I see our way going forward beyond now and beyond 2050. Malo Bito Lisa.
Malo Opito. I'm just lost for words because no more words are needed. I think you've ended it on a wonderful note, on a note of reflection. And I think inviting all of us to think more about the issues that you've both highlighted, and our minister who has been unable to get online, and the one in Palau still connecting, reminding us that in the Pacific, we have to keep it real and acknowledge the difficulties around connecting, but that when we do connect, the beauty and the truth of our ideas make it so worthwhile. And on that note, may I thank you for making this a truly worthwhile webinar for the people today. It will be packaged and heading up online of our various platforms, and it will be shared from there. I send you warm Pacific Friday afternoon greetings to every corner of everyone who's watching here. May you have a blessed weekend. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you so much for the feast and the deep dive that we've had into the ocean today. May your work continue and may it deliver good impact, strong results for our Pacific region, whatever acronym you're dealing with. BBNJ, all the hats you wear, Langi, all the many more that are to come on your strong shoulders, and the work that you're doing for all that blue zone behind you, Rose. Wow, full respect. Lolomas from this corner of the forum as we end our session today. Thank you. God bless.
Maka.